Hello everybody, Mark Sage here, Executive Director of the area, AR for Enterprise Alliance, and excited to be here with our latest webinar with ArborXR. I'm sure many of you, well, I'm sure nearly everybody out there knows about ArborXR, but today we're going to be kind of covering what they're doing, but also some interesting new work that they're doing and new technology and new solutions that they brought. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Just a little bit about who we are as Arbor. So we support over 3,000 companies, helping them manage and scale their XR deployments. Over 60 of those are Fortune 500s across 90 countries. Some of the logos at the bottom are some of the people that we work with. So on the MDM side of things, this is what you have probably heard of us as before. We help you manage devices. So this is changing settings, provisioning corporate Wi-Fi, anything that a normal MDM would do. That's what we help you do specifically for XR devices. A lot of XR devices have a lot of extra functionality that isn't exposed in a legacy MDM, and we help expose that functionality. We also help you install and manage the applications on the device. XR applications obviously aren't on the Google Play Store or the Meta Quest Store, and they're large applications. And traditionally, legacy MDMs don't do a good job downloading, installing them, keeping them up to date, and we make that nice and seamless. Then on the VR side and MR side, less the AR side, we have a custom in-headset experience. We let you customize that kiosk on the device, set what applications are available, what settings are available, and kind of customize the branding to fit your business needs. So what's still holding us back? This is going to be the big point of this talk, is what are we missing in XR today to make it successful? And we're looking at two big things here that we're trying to solve. One is actually capturing meaningful data from the devices, what's happening, what people are doing, how they're using them, what's going on inside of those applications. And then after that, getting that data where it actually needs to go to be useful. That means not just sitting in a spreadsheet on your computer, not being put onto an SD card that you have to then go to every headset to pull out, actually delivering these to the systems where you want to have that data live, so you can actually get actionable insights out of them.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. Okay, so Dan here. On this has kind of been the focus I've had for a number of years. I've been thinking about this problem in the XR space. As we've looked at this, like historically, when you want to scale up an XR program, the first part was just even managing the headsets. And so Arbor, on the MDM side, that was one of the first things to really tackle as you scale up. Once you get past a handful of headsets, without an MDM, it's very difficult to manage a large use case, right? So that was really the first thing holding the whole industry back. Now that that's kind of being solved, and there's Arbor's the best solution out there, but there's there's solutions out there for that problem. The next thing is, how do we actually enable the programs to really grow? And this part here, this capturing meaningful data and getting it where it needs to go, was something that was really bothering me about, like, what is happening and why are we doing it? If we look at how like data drives business decisions outside of XR. So let's get out of XR for a second. This is a normal process. This is a flow chart I just Googled up. But this is a normal process for making like data-driven decisions, right? You collect the data, you process it, you do analytics on it, you generate, insights or reporting on that, gets up to the decision makers. They go through their process and their formulas to figure out, is this something that we need to, continue or adjust or whatever? And then they start making investment and implementation decisions, right? And then things drive forward, and then this kind of loops around. So this is how businesses and organizations flow, regardless of what type of business, right? Could be a school. They're going to go through the same flow, figuring out what curriculum is working for them, right? They're going to collect data, process it, do analytics, and it drives decision making, right? And this is that magic ROI conversation, right? How do we prove that there's a return on investment? And this is kind of how it gets done on a normal basis. When I look at the VR space, what are we doing today? We're like, I see, customer surveys and, liker outcomes, and it's like, okay, well, what proof do we have? Somebody took a note that Bob liked it, right? Like that's what I'm seeing. And I don't know, how many of you can kind of confirm that that's what you see out there, but that's what I see on a pretty regular basis as we go through. Is there's not a lot of hard data on like what's actually being done and what's being successful. So this is kind of what this talk and the conversation I want to have is for this group is like, how do we start changing this? Because right now, and Matt, you can step in here too, but it does feel like as through these conversations we've been having, as we talk with different customers, we talk with folks at conferences, the VR programs are still running in silos, right? They're running off on the side, and generally, if you're operating outside of the existing processes, you're often going to fall to the side, right? You're not taking advantage of the existing machinery in an organization that drives all of the other initiatives, right? If you're totally outside and you're being your own pioneer, you're going to struggle in ways that other processes don't. And so this is what I've been seeing, right, in XR. And there's a lot of pioneers, and we've seen this, we're still in the early days to a large degree, but in the earlier days, the VR programs would struggle because they were on their own. They didn't have, if you think about it, before they had an MDM, they were doing things manually. And so IT really couldn't help like drive the process and trying to get budget. You couldn't go through your normal processes, man. Maybe this is something you saw. I mean, you must have seen this on the MDM side where people, before they could have that, IT would be like, well, how do I manage these headsets, right? Was that like a normal question that would come up, and the normal process like had the same kind of problem on the MDM?
Yep, all the time. People either not having any idea what to do, just didn't want to tell IT these devices existed because they didn't want to deal with the questions. And then if they, did manage to get Arbor, sometimes they didn't tell IT they were using it. And then, of course, a year or two down the later, if the program's successful and they want to scale, it's a much harder conversation to have about, getting it established properly.
Yeah, and there are existing processes, and IT will help if they have the tooling and they know what is going on, right? And so I was seeing this sort of problem. There are a lot of existing processes, right? A lot of the use case that we're dealing with, and obviously there's lots of use cases, but let's just talk about like training for a minute. There's a lot of like training and education content out there, and so they're kind of like going it alone. There's a whole industry in education tech, right? Education technologies, ed tech. There's a whole like ecosystem there in ed tech that has learned how to build content and measure the learner pace, right? Measure what's happening. And they have a lot of tools, right? And so they have like LMSs, and LMSs aren't just for schools. LMSs are used by everybody. If you've got an HR portal that they're assigning you like training that you have to do to be within compliance, that's going through the HR's LMS. LMSs are used LMS is learning management system. And HRIS is the HR information systems. They have these tools in place for this reason, so they can track and measure who's doing training and how it's getting done, all this sort of thing. They have the tooling that is being used by everything else. And like I said, this whole industry in ed tech have this ecosystem that a lot of it centers around LMSs and building content that's going to go into the LMS so they can do this assignment. The LMS tools already handle like the single sign-on and workflow. They're very integrated into other things, right? Your HR system is where you're going to go, request time off or, check your insurance and see that you have trainings that you have to complete, right? Everything's kind of already there. There's a machinery for it. And as you know, on the VR side, when we're sitting in our little silo off to the side and we're not integrating into the existing systems, we're having challenges, right? Same thing on the, I don't have a slide for this, but on the data and analytics, if you want to prove that that you have meaningful data and you have measurables, there's business intelligence tools like Power BI and Tableau that really enable the senior management to look at everything that's going on and start to measure out and make business decisions. So if I'm integrated in there, right, they have their analytics tools, they have their business intelligence tools. If they can see that, okay, in this location, they're doing our cool new, forklift training. And we're seeing that over the last, 6 months, 12 months, whatever, that we're having less incidents, right? Less things are getting broken, less injuries, whatever. There's less incidents from the folks that have done the cool VR forklift training versus the one that just gets trained by the guy who happens to be on shift when the guy, needs to get trained, right? When the next person needs to get trained. When they can start seeing the side by side, right, of the VR versus the other modalities being video or web-based training or whatever, if they can start to see those side by side, especially within the LMS, they can actually measure them side by side. If they can then take that up into Power BI and start to see the financial outcome, well, that's what drives decisions and business decisions that are going to benefit from, that cycle I was showing earlier where, they're going to see those decision points and or those data points that are going to say, oh, this is worth investing into. And they'll start to track that. We're not seeing so much of that today. I have not seen as much. And Matt, I don't know if you're seeing a lot of it, or this, the ROI thing comes up a lot. But that everybody says, it's just like, it feels like this unicorn, this mystical thing that doesn't really exist. But I don't know if you've been hearing that over the years. What's your experience been there?
Yeah, it's always been the golden goose of proving that it is an industry worth investing in, and hardware that is actually paying for itself and making the company money, either across training or across safety or across just the data you can get out of what your team is doing with these devices. Definitely have seen it start to tick up more and more as companies get mature and are a little more focused on how they're using XR, but it's definitely not commonplace yet.
Yeah. It was. I think it's been kind of funny. I want to actually where we'll pivot over to is some of what we've seen. I've been having these conversations over the last almost couple of years now with folks as I try to figure out what are they doing today, and so I'm going to just run through some scenarios that were very interesting to me as we're going through. And okay, what's funny is I'm going to go through some scenarios of what people have been doing. They're making an effort, right, in some cases, but man, it falls short of what the other industries, in IT. We've seen these things. I've been in IT and cybersecurity for 25 years, and no longer than that. Anyway, and we've seen some of these patterns repeat. So anyway, just going to go through some horror stories. That I say horror story, it's probably things that some of you are probably going to be watching this and going oh yeah, I can relate to that. We did the same thing, or we struggled here. So I'm going to go through a couple examples of what we've seen, and hopefully kind of point a light on it and say we can do better, right? We need to do better if we want this space to grow. So let's look at some of the things that we've seen out there. This was kind of interesting. This is there was this Fortune 500, and they have this training that they do It wasn't actually forklift training, but whatever. They had a training they were doing, and they had no real data solution. So what they were doing is they actually had, they're not collecting data from the actual content itself. What they were actually doing is they actually had an instructor that would go out with the headset, and they had a companion app, and they would watch what the learner actually is doing. So, be screen sharing or screen casting. So they're casting to this tablet. The trainer would be watching what they're doing, and also have like a notepad where they're writing down notes of what the learner actually did. Right. So it's a 1-to-1 in this situation. Right. The trainer had to watch that one learner and grade things on a piece of paper, and then later on would go and enter this in. And I was having this, they were describing how this was working. I was like, so you mean your trainer can only do one person at a time? And they're like, yeah, because he has to watch what he's doing. And I'm like, well, like that feels very inefficient. Right. Now, of course, you're still doing things that maybe are difficult or dangerous or expensive to replicate in real life. So maybe that's a thing you have to do. But I mean, if you actually were recording data from the content, and the content itself was tracking, to make sure that, let's say this forklift training, that, the item, the pallet got picked up and put where it needed to be, that like the speed never exceeded a certain, maximum, that the item was placed gently on the shelf, whatever. You could track these things in the data itself and get recording. You don't have to actually watch. And that way the trainer could potentially have 10 students at a time, right? 10 learners at a time. They don't need to be 1-to-1, right? They don't even need to be there, ideally, right? Maybe they need, maybe you want somebody there to help folks get in and out of the headsets or whatever, to get acclimated. But it doesn't need to be a 1-to-1. But this is actually what they were doing. They were watching it. And I see a lot of folks, I think, and Matt, I don't know if you've seen this. I think screencasting is super helpful for troubleshooting, right? You need that, right? In the situations where people are like, oh, where am I supposed to go? And like, okay, let me see where you are, what you're looking at. And you can jump in and see it. But to like watch the whole session, I don't know. Did you run into this? You see this sort of thing very often?
I've seen both that and then people recording the videos of what people are doing and reviewing that after the fact, which just sounds like the worst job in the world, just spending hours and hours just watching these videos of people fumbling around in VR.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not as good as watching some of the streamers play a game or something, right? It's not as fun experience. But again, this is that example of like where, like, I understand why they did it this way because they had to. But like this is also not capturing like real hard data. It's just whatever the trainer annotates on his notepad. And I was cracking up to him, like, we have like the VR headset, like we have this amazing advanced technology, and he's literally writing his notes on a piece of paper that he has to then transcribe in later to the LMS. It's pretty funny. We also saw, this is a common thing. A lot of folks are trying to figure out, how do we identify the learner? And so there's been a lot of different solutions. And what I see a lot is a lot of folks are still trying to get users to log in inside the headset, right? And going through the single sign-on process or whatever in headset, which is a really bad user experience. Going through and because the reason this factors into data collection is because you're trying to figure out this learner, so I could track records to this learner, right? So they need to identify that learner, and so they're trying to do login because that's what you do normally, right? But that's really not the greatest experience. What we ended up doing and flipping this is saying, okay, let's go to the LMS and let's have folks log into the LMS and give them a pin from the LMS, right? And it looks, let me see, I have a screenshot here. Looks a little bit like this, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute. But inside the content, it's going to, inside the LMS, we drop this in and say, okay, here's a little six-digit pin. Now go put on the headset, enter this pin, and now we can actually link those that learner to the content. And it's just a better user experience, and it gives us that data point of who this learner is, right? So that right there streamlines so much, right? Because now you're not trying to get somebody to enter into a headset, and I can identify this learner. But this is what they've been doing. And imagine if you're trying to enter your password in, ideally you're supposed to have like a real complex password. Maybe you're using a password manager that's, helping randomly generate a password. Trying to enter into that headset. How many times are you going to be taking the headset on and off before you finally get your password entered in properly? That's just not a great user experience. And it's something that, again, there's already existing systems like the LMS. There's, whatever. There's lots of different ways to do this. You can even do it like, when you want to register Netflix on your TV, and it gives you that little, code, and you go into your Netflix on your browser and you type in the code, and then it links the TV to your Netflix account or whatever. That there are solutions out there for solving these things that people have not been using. But it's important so that you can get to that learner identification, so you can actually start tracking data. But yeah, I don't know, the LMS thing, and Matt, I know like on the Arbor side, we solved it. We added the SSO authentication into the MDM, but I've got to imagine you hear lots of horror stories of people trying to get logged in and then maybe even lock in their account. Is that sort of thing happen because they're trying to do it in VR for too many?
All the time. And then you get into doing two-factor authentication in VR, which is just as painful as it sounds, having to, take your headset off, look at your phone, go find the code, put it back on the headset, try to remember the code you just did before you shuffled everything. It's great for security, but it's a nightmare for practicality.
Yeah, it's rough. I actually had this therapeutics company that I was talking with, and they were trying to describe their process. And they create this really cool content that helps people. I think it deals with like pain management or something. But what they ended up having to do is the content actually gets customized to the patient. And so then what they end up doing is the patient is at home. So they actually like create a special file, like a pain profile thing, that they put onto the headset. And but they're going through all of these manual steps. They were actually like, they would manually apply the data for the patient. And they would, like with the flash drive, or with the USB, they would plug the headset into the computer. They would drop this file into the right place on the headset, and then they would ship it to the patient. Patient would use the headset for a month or whatever, and there was some data being collected onto another file onto the headset. And so when they would receive the headset back, they would then take that file off of the headset, get rid of both files, right? Because they had the one that was trained to the patient. They would take both files off, and then they were putting it on a flash drive and mailing it to their analytics team. That's a lot of steps and a lot of manual like shipping, which again, Matt, I'm sure very much aligns with early, headset management, right? Before MDMs really solved a lot of this. Got to be pretty
Definitely.
Similar, right?
Very similar.
Yeah. So, but that's what they were doing. And I was like, this is not efficient, right? If you have a solution that you can actually do collection, right? And Arbor has Arbor Insights. If you have a tool that makes it really easy to collect data and push data to the headset, you could just ship the headset. And even after the fact, you can push that custom file to the headset for that patient. You don't have to do it before you ship it even. You just get it shipped and then push the file and then have data being collected in real time into an analytics tool that, then could be, pulled in from from the analytics team directly, and they can use the data. That simplifies this entire process, right? There are tools to do this, and you don't have to go through all of these manual steps. Again, this is what we're seeing very commonly, right? It's like just too many manual steps. And so just simplifying it and using a real data product can make this easy. And like going through their process, like this took so much. This is taking, and we're in the middle of getting all this switched over for this company. But they love the simplicity. They love how streamlined it is. All they have to do is ship headsets, receive them, clean them, ship them back out. It's now a one person task, with just it's a couple simple steps versus, a whole bunch of efforts and all kinds of things going on because they're using a better data solution, right? They knew they needed the data, but they weren't doing it efficiently. All right, next one. This was interesting. I mentioned this, like let's say you do integrate with the LMS. And so now you're assigning, in this for this company as employees, they're assigning employees training that they have to do to stay within compliance. Cool, fantastic. They're doing some of the right things here. The problem that they had is that they ended up having some employees who, for whatever reasons, couldn't use VR, right? Either made them nauseous, right? Maybe they had a disability, whatever. There's a number of things that, for a number of reasons, why people can't use VR or are uncomfortable with it, or just physically can't use it at all. And so they were being assigned in the LMS, you need to do this training. They'd go in to the training and see that, oh, this is VR. And they would say, oh, I can't do VR. And so they said, I need to opt out. And it turned out one of the employees who had a disability couldn't do it, tried to opt out. And there ended up being like, the person ended up recording that there was like 16 steps to opt out of VR. And because they had to they got it assigned, then they had to log out of the system. They had to go email somebody. That person would then reassign it, and then they would have to log. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of steps, and they felt like this is this is not accessibility friendly. This is not a good experience. Why do I have to go through so much effort to opt out when there is web-based training available that we used to use and should be fine? It just wasn't very friendly to somebody that's already dealing with something else. And so it kind of reminded me of this family circus scenario I had seen years and years ago. And so I was like, yeah, this is what it feels like. It's like, this is way too much going on here. And so going back to this thing here, why not just embed this in to this LMS screen? And so what we ended up doing is, where it gives them that pin, it also has this link down here that says unable to use VR. Okay, click here. We ask them why, and then we actually will immediately launch the web-based training. So there's only one question, right? You just basically say, can't use it. Here's my poll question, and now it launches right into the web-based training. This is possible when you're actually working within the existing process, right? Going back to, this, benefiting from the flow, go back up here for a second on my slides. When you're working outside of it, you're putting people through all this extra effort. But if you're operating within the existing processes, then things like this become possible. And this is kind of what we want to really encourage as we're kind of moving through, is we want folks to be thinking about how you benefit from working within the systems. And so anyway, that's it. One final use case that was kind of funny. This company had actually hired a content developer, fantastic content developer, to build this training content. And but they know they needed data. So the developer, the ISV, the developer actually ended up having to host a server to collect data. and they were, so it was being stored, and they gave their customer an ability to like download a CSV file. So the airline was downloading every week. They'd go in there and download a CSV file, and then they would take it and go push it into like Power BI or whatever and do their processing. But they were having to manually do this every week. And it turned out the ISV, the content developer, was like, I didn't really think I was going to have to host this thing forever. And they're stuck hosting this server side solution for, a couple of years now. And, they're paying this ongoing cost when they're kind of like, the airline had like hired them to build a piece of content. It's kind of like a one-time, expense, but now the ISV is kind of stuck hosting it, and they sorted it out. But it's like, ISV is like, I didn't want to have to be hosting this thing and remembering that it needs to be maintained and doing system updates on it. Just not efficient, right? And so again, this is where like having like a proper data solution, especially something that's maybe a shared solution by lots of other folks that integrates with your tools, makes it a lot easier. So anyway, these are just some of the examples that we've been seeing. And Matt, I don't know if you've got any others. I see we got a question here. You got, okay, I'm going to read this one here. I've got some answered ones already. Forklift training, example presented. Yeah, getting performance metrics versus real-time human feedback. Okay, so they're saying here it is sometimes valuable to be watching and giving real-time feedback. And that's absolutely true. Sometimes that real-time activity and being able to like really see what's going on is helpful. But do you want to have to always do that? And, is that an efficient like model to be operating under? That's where I question it. Not that every once in a while it's good to have that, right? But going to this one here, but it does, like, even if let's say you're watching and you're coaching in real time, you still want hard data, right? So I would say if you're going to do this, I would do both, right? Have the hard data that is truly measuring all of the, the activity and the outcomes, and then have somebody that's coaching, right? So I don't know if that kind of gets to what you're talking about there, Adam, but that's one thing I would, like you said, if it's like a surgeon or something, yes, having that surgeon there coaching, answering questions, awesome. But you still would want to measure so that they can go back and actually see the hard data, right? That's going to tell its own story. And so having both, I would recommend. Okay, so I think, are we close on our time? I think so.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, again, the key thing here is we really think data matters. Data matters very much in XR. If you want to get to really have a scalable program, you really need to have a data solution. You need to be thinking about it. And so that's really the heart of what we want to do, is get you all thinking about this so that you start going like, what am I doing with data and how am I using this to benefit us? Right. Everybody's dealing with the AI, AI is all about data. And AI is not that helpful if it doesn't have real good data to work with. So if you want to start even incorporating AR into your solutions, you're going to need data. And you're going to need to be able to like learn from the data, tailor your content to the data, based on the data. So, I'm a data guy. So it's, maybe that's my lens on it. You want good content too, but data matters. And I just want to kind of get that story out there so folks could start thinking about it more.
Well, Dan, can I just add to that? And thank you very much for those insights. But some of you on the webinar may not know, but the area is now actually part of the EDMA association, which is basically a data association. So to your point, we've kind of seen the benefits of it. The data association has also seen the benefits of XR. So hopefully over the coming weeks and months, we can really focus down on this, not only from kind of actively managing data, but understanding it. And it brings a whole kind of bunch of new potential members, but interesting insight. So I couldn't agree more with you. And I think this is a really good time for us in terms of that data and XR part. I just got one quick question before we finish. I've spent a part of my career doing product management and defining requirements. And when it comes to digital products, for some reason, the kind of the data, the analysis, providing that feedback and understanding the ROI seems to be the first thing that gets cut from the requirements. And they focus on all the features and things like that. Any insights and why is that? And how can we as an industry, because I think it's not great when it comes to the XR space, knowing what people are doing and how well they're doing it. Any kind of ideas of how we can change that conversation? I know it's a very high level question, but any thoughts on what we can do to make sure that data and the management of it becomes the most important part?
I think simplification, right? I think as we have these conversations a lot, and I'm not trying to like pitch our product necessarily, just wanted to share how we think about this, right? Is you have to make it easy so that it's not something that's burdensome and expensive to go and implement. So a lot of the reasons that it's, it may fall by the wayside is if you're an individual ISV, developer, and now all of a sudden you have to think about building up a server and setting up APIs to receive the data and securing all of this and maintaining that actually becomes a very costly effort, right? And so you have to build the API and the server hosting. You also have to then build code on the client or within the content to collect the data and send it and have all the, data exchanges and all that stuff. It becomes complicated. And so if now all of a sudden you're thinking about that and you're like, I'm a VR developer. I know how to build really cool VR experiences. I'm not a data guy. On the other hand, if you've got a company like Arbor that is providing you with an open source SDK, you just drop it into your project. And, so if you're using Unity, for example, you drop in this free package. And then all of a sudden you just have to add in a few lines of code here and there to say like, okay, user started this and this is what they did. And you just record it. And it's now being stored in a secure location. You get past all the SOC 2 compliance conversations. You get past all of that. Somebody like Arbor's handling that. I think that will help avoid getting cut, right? Because now it's not so costly. It's not so complicated. And then you have data, and now you start going, okay, well, now what do I do with this data? And that's the next question that we're going to try to help answer. But that first step of collection is very hard if you're an individual ISV, like, thinking about the privacy compliance and SOC 2 compliance and all these things that the customer is going to ask for. That gets hard.
Stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess everybody out there, let's make sure that, this information is in part of the kind of solutions that you're building, because it will create that ROI piece. And it's something, the area talks a lot about, the return on investment. To your point at the very start, businesses are based on creating ROI. So, we need to measure it and be able to communicate it. Awesome. Right. I don't see any other questions, gentlemen, and we're at the 45-minute mark. So, excuse me. Just thank you for your insights. Looking forward to continue working with you and the rest of the ecosystem. This will be made available to everybody and then also be on the area website and probably in a month's time on the area YouTube channel as well. But thank you very much, guys. Really insightful. Really enjoyed that. And continue to work together. Perfect. And thanks everyone for listening.